You remember how she used to look at you like you were her whole world, and now she barely looks at you at all. No warning, no fight, just distance, silence. And you're left asking, what happened to us? She used to lean into you, hold your hand, reach for your warmth at night. You remember those moments, how natural they felt, how simple love was back then. But now she turns away. The warmth is gone. The spark is gone. And somehow you're the one left feeling guilty. Like maybe you said the wrong thing or didn't notice the signs quickly enough. You start asking yourself, did I miss something? Did I stop being the man she fell in love with? This is the heartbreak that keeps good men up at night. Men who stayed, who tried, who never broke their vows. Because if love and trust are what intimacy is supposed to be built on, if it's about connection and respect, then why does it hurt this way? Why does the woman who promised forever suddenly seem so far away, while offering pieces of herself to someone else, someone who hasn't built anything with her, someone who doesn't even know the weight of her story? In this video, I'm going to share something most people won't dare say out loud. Not to stir bitterness, not to place blame, but to give good men, men like you, the truth you deserve. To hear a truth that could bring you peace. We'll talk about the emotional shifts that often happen in silence. We'll unpack how sex, over time, can stop being an act of love and start becoming something else entirely. A weapon, a tool, a way to say, I'm not okay without using words. And most importantly, we'll explore why so many good men end up confused, heartbroken, and blaming themselves for a loss they didn't cause. All of this, from the inside out. No sugarcoating, no cheap shots, just the raw truth that might finally help you understand what changed, and maybe, even more importantly, what to do next. Comment relationships below if you've ever felt like something changed and you didn't know why. I read every comment, and I want you to stay with me until the end, because there's a part of this story most people overlook. A moment of clarity that could help you understand not just what happened, but what to do next. The moment it all changed probably didn't happen with a big blow-up or some dramatic fight. In fact, it likely came quietly. You didn't see it coming. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just this subtle shift in the air. One day she smiled a little less. Her laugh didn't sound as full, the kisses grew shorter, the touches came less often, and eventually they stopped altogether, not just physically but emotionally. The woman who used to lean into your side during a movie now sits at the far end of the couch. The goodnight kiss feels more like a routine than a connection. You start to wonder, what changed? Did I miss a sign? And that's when the self-doubt creeps in. You blame yourself, you try harder. You ask her what's wrong, and she either shrugs or says, I'm fine. But deep down, something's not fine. And here's the truth, most men over 50 rarely hear. This shift wasn't always because of you. Some women begin to shut down, not because they've stopped loving you, but because they never learned how to love themselves when the excitement wore off, when real life set in. She might be battling feelings she doesn't even understand, resentments, regrets, disappointments that go all the way back to who she thought she'd become and what she thought marriage would feel like. But instead of working through those feelings, she quietly pulls away. Not because she's cruel, but because she's lost and doesn't know how to ask for help without feeling weak or exposed. Sex is one of those things we, as women, often describe in idealistic terms. We say it's about love, about trust, about emotional connection, and for many women it can be. But what we don't talk about enough, what we hardly admit even to ourselves, is that sex can also turn into something else entirely. Sometimes it becomes a bargaining chip, a tool we use to feel in control when life feels out of control, when we feel like we're not being heard, when our expectations of marriage don't match reality, or when we've built up unspoken resentments that we never worked through. We don't always come to our partners with vulnerability. Instead, we hold back. We retreat. We create emotional distance, and physical distance soon follows. And it's not always because of something you did wrong. In fact, many times you're doing the best you can. But we start believing a different story, the one in our heads that says he should make me happy. When that happiness doesn't show up, we assume you're the problem. That's when sex shifts. It's no longer an act of closeness, it becomes a quiet punishment. We won't raise our voices, we won't throw things, but we'll withhold ourselves in a way that cuts deeper. Because now, it's not just about feeling rejected, it's about feeling unwanted by someone who promised to be our partner. And sometimes, without even saying a word, we let you feel the full weight of that disappointment while keeping the reasons locked up inside. Some women don't just pull away, they drift. Quietly, gradually, they start looking elsewhere for what they feel is missing inside themselves. And it's not always about sex. In fact, more often than not, it's about something far less physical and far more emotional. It's about attention. It's about that flutter of being desired again, of hearing someone say, "You're beautiful," or "I can't believe your husband doesn't appreciate you." That kind of flattery hits deep when someone's been feeling invisible in their own home. So when they meet someone, sometimes even another married man, they lean in. They tell themselves, "He listens to me. He really sees me." But what they don't realize is, this new man is often hurting too. He's just as disconnected from his own marriage, just as lost in his own confusion. What begins between them isn't love, it's escape. It's a shared emotional fantasy, where each person plays the role the other wishes their spouse played. And they convince themselves this illusion is real, because it's easier than doing the work it takes to heal. So when she comes back to you and says she felt unseen, unheard, unloved, it's not that you stopped loving her. It's that somewhere along the way, she stopped being able to love herself. And instead of looking inward, she went looking outward. Because facing your own emotional wreckage is much harder than blaming the person beside you. Have you ever sat across from your wife as she told stories about her past? The ex-boyfriend who mistreated her, the man before you who was selfish, cold, maybe even cruel. She might have called him a narcissist, said he never really loved her, claimed he broke her trust and made her feel worthless. And you, hearing all of that, felt like the safe harbor. You were the one who listened, who stayed, who didn't raise your voice or walk away. She may have even told you that you were the only one who ever truly cared, and maybe you believed her. Why wouldn't you? But here's a hard truth that's not easy to say out loud. Sometimes that story isn't the whole truth. Sometimes it's just a version that helped her feel less guilty about how she felt. It's not that her ex was perfect, not at all. But over time, if she never faced the emotions buried inside her, hurt, regret, shame, or disappointment, those feelings twisted the memory into something more useful. They gave her someone to blame. And when those unresolved emotions show up in your marriage, you might get blamed too, without ever really knowing why. Because it's easier to rewrite the past than take a long, honest look at the present. When you stood at the altar and said, "I do," you meant every word. You weren't just saying yes to the good times, you were signing up for the tough seasons too. The hard conversations, the unexpected struggles, the growing pains that come with building a life together. You understood that real love takes effort, that it changes shape over time, but becomes deeper when it's nurtured through storms, not just sunshine. But for some women, especially those who carried emotional wounds into the marriage, that vow meant something different. They weren't thinking about year 5 or year 15. They weren't imagining what it would take to stay connected when life got heavy. They were picturing the big day, the dress, the compliments, the romance of being chosen. And when the music faded and real life set in, when jobs got stressful, when the kids needed more, when bodies aged and routines settled in, The reality didn't match the picture they'd painted. Instead of adjusting, some women turned inward. They grew resentful. And because they didn't know how to say, "I feel lost," they looked at you and decided you were the reason it all felt so different. Slowly, without warning, they shut down, not just emotionally, but intimately. And the distance grew. This part is especially for the good men, the ones who've done their best to stay steady. You've stayed when it got hard. You've given your time, your energy, your patience. You've been loyal, even when it felt like you were the only one still fighting for the connection. And yet, despite all that, you still find yourself shut out. Cold shoulders, short answers, emotional silence. You ask questions, you try to be present, but it feels like nothing you do makes a difference. And here's the truth that's hard to hear, but necessary. You can't fix what she won't face. If she's never taken the time to look inward, to unpack her emotional baggage, to really understand her patterns, then no matter how much you love her, it's not going to feel like enough. Because the emptiness she's feeling isn't coming from you, it's coming from within her. And if she believes that it's your job to fill that space, she's already set you up to fail. You were never meant to carry her emotional weight. You can offer love, support, and presence, but you cannot heal wounds that she refuses to acknowledge. That's her work to do. And until she's willing to do it, all you'll be doing is pouring your heart into a cup with a hole in the bottom. So, if you've been sitting there in silence, lying awake at night wondering what went wrong, questioning if you missed something or if you somehow failed her, you can stop carrying that weight. Because now you know the truth. You didn't lose your value. You didn't become less of a man. You didn't drop the ball. What happened wasn't because you weren't enough. It happened because she expected the marriage to fix what she never dealt with inside herself, and when it didn't, she pointed the blame outward, toward the one person who kept showing up, you. She may never admit it. She may never sit across from you and say, "I made this harder than it had to be." But you don't need her to say it for you to find your peace. The moment you see it clearly is the moment you begin to heal. This isn't about resentment. It's about release. It's about understanding what really happened so you can stop replaying a story that was never yours to hold on to. If anything in this message struck a chord, I want to hear from you. Comment, "Men over 50" or "healing." Down below, I read every single one. And if there's someone in your life who needs to hear this, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Because there are far too many good men walking around with broken hearts and unanswered questions, thinking they're the only ones. They're not. You're not. And no matter where you are in your story, I want you to remember this. Your story still matters, your heart still matters, and you still matter.